What you're about to see are a bunch of clips from recent conversations, including a panel discussion I didn't get to, which is on Grail Country, and of course, all the links will be below. Released a little video this morning, which was sort of off the top of my head yesterday. Just had to get something out. Wanted to get some of these ideas just out of my head and throwing at you guys about civilization, Paul Kingsnorth talk, the Day of the Lord. I My conversation yesterday with John Heers, which is in No Wait No Ads. There's a clip from that. That was a wonderful conversation, so much fun. And then my conversation I just had this morning with Jordan Hall was just a revelation. It's in No Wait No Ads too. It'll be coming out. I'm leaving town next week, and so videos will again be disrupted. I have no ideas how many videos will or won't come out, but yeah. So I'm just going to put these clips together and put them up. The full conversations will be out by next week. But I need to write a sermon today, and we've had some other dislocations at church that I have to manage. So there's just a lot of stuff on my schedule. But these things continue to be on my mind, and I want to get them out there. And I want to get you chewing on them so I can see what you produce. So my channel continues to evolve.
He would. I'll paraphrase. That's right, Paul and John. That's right. It's all coming down, and here's what's gonna happen. There's gonna be a flourish of quote Christianity, and people are gonna run into the churches. This is actually, he said this 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and he said, and when they do, it's gonna look great. But that's not really what you're seeing, because the next step is a massive persecution. He's not talking about, the end of times. He's saying the next step will be a persecution. The persecution will take the dross off of all those newcomers. Most people will leave the church at that point. They'll get out because they don't want the fire. Yeah. And the people that remain will be the true purveyors and the witnesses of Christianity. That feels, I mean, that was 30, 40 years ago. He said that feels like it might be happening to me. And I just want to be one of those people that run in there and maybe stay in there. But that begs a question, Paul, which is one I want to ask you. And I asked Justin Brierley this too. None of my Orthodox friends know Justin Brierley. I love Justin Brierley. Yeah, they don't know him.
Justin's amazing.
I had him on my little podcast, and I got Justin Brierley. And they're like, I don't know who that is. And I thought to myself, you guys, come on. He's not Orthodox, but here's the deal. This guy was doing the small voice against the new atheists in like 2001, Paul, 2001.
Yeah.
And now look what happened. He kind of he's that guy. I love him. But I had him on the show and I said, okay, what's the church though? This is deep down. I realize ecclesiology is probably the reason why you and I, in the end, we go break bread and have a great drink and have dinner and all that. But I think this is the big problem for returning Christians. People who wake up, they don't know which direction to run in. It's too confusing. And our ecclesiology is a mess in the West. No offense to anybody. I'm a Westerner. It's a mess. And Justin uses the word church in a way that's messy. And I told him, I said, that's messy, the way you're describing it. He's like, he's a good guy, but he said, let's just not talk about that. That's not this moment. This moment is, there's a massive collection of humans they're hungry for beauty and for Christ. Just let them run toward that way, toward the good way. Don't screw them up with this ecclesiology. It's too complicated. I'm paraphrasing. I don't think that'll work though. I don't think that'll work. It's once people arrive in the church, the next question is what binds us? Because that's what religion, that's the lig, and that's a ligament in the idea of a religious people is what is binding us. I know it's Christ. I get it. But how do we express that? It gets confusing. I blame you guys for that. Don't get mad at me. What I
Yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah. Well, no,
Well, let's blame
Protestant.
it Luther. I blame Luther. This is well, actually, let's go back to the papal Protestant. Let's go back to the first popes. You could argue that they started this interesting cavalcade of confusion. You don't like that reading, though.
No, no, no. I very much agree. I mean, I feel Luther's story is so interesting because I think the best read is that Luther had no intention of rebelling against the
Mm,
church.
yeah,
It was just that when suddenly he realized that this see, and I don't even know that in the 16th century what they thought of as the church is what we think of it in terms of this word institution. I suspect that the church was, when I listen to someone like Richard Rowland, and he talks about the fact that when he, as this crazy nerd that he is, loves reading, all of this pre this early
yeah,
Christian stuff in Ireland and Anglo-Saxon that it looks all very orthodox because part of my impression, and I'm still trying to, the more I learn about the Orthodox and the Catholics, the more I'm just like, what are these things? What it's really it's because one of the things that the
I
more
love it,
the
man.
more that I've seen Orthodoxy, the more that I say, boy, it's way more chaotic than I imagined at
It is.
first impression.
It is.
On one hand, you guys really, love the idea of submission and some places really practice it. But I always thought that chaos and submission were antitheticals, but it doesn't really look that way with you guys.
No, it's
So
the paradox.
so
It's weird.
Luther, young Augustinian monk has all of this angst and overly sensitive conscience, according to his confessor. Sort of lets loose with this blog post on the Wittenberg door, and because he's a young man and he just wants to see the church clean up his act. He's zealous for the church, and so then didn't realize that he really stepped on some. Hey, we're trying to build a basilica down here and we need the money, so don't get in the way of the fundraising.
Yeah,
Any missionary can understand those ideas.
for sure.
And then he begins to dawn on him that this thing that he loves so much, he just the cry of his heart is that he wants to purify it. They're gonna kill him. They're gonna burn him at the stake. And then he's all zealous. He's like, go ahead and burn me. And his prince is like, dude, I've invested so much in you.
Yeah, you can't go. You can't
I'm not going
die.
to let you get burned. I'm going to kidnap you and lock you in a castle and just keep writing your angsty stuff. And then this new printing press is going to spew it all over the
That's
world.
right.
And I mean, it's just a crazy story. And out of that comes this massive plurality of not just ideas and theologies, but especially institutions and forms and ways. And it's been an astounding mess. And I think actually, I think it's going to get messier.
Do you?
I do. But when I say messier, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be sort of really hardened and and precious precious things. And again, it gets back to this tension between fasting and feasting,
Mm.
because it's so funny when, of course, those who are watching what's happening with Jesus and his disciples come to Jesus and say, "Hey, look, we've got our fasting and feasting stuff going on here in our resistance to Rome and Hellenism and all of these things happening. Why aren't your disciples fasting?" And he
Mm.
says, "Well, the bridegroom is here. Why would they fast when I'm here?" Okay. And so then he goes away and they're in terror, and then he comes back and they're in celebration, but then he ascends. And so then you have the question, because obviously he's at the right hand of God the Father and he's reigning over heaven and earth. And so surely I will be with you to the end of the age. So, and I think you're exactly right that the church over a long period of time, in order to try to embody the tensions in this story, said what we're going to do is have a communal pattern of fasting and feasting. That's so right. That our people understand both modalities.
Yes. Because that's the DNA of existence. God became man so man can become God. This is the partnership. This is the partnership. This is how it looks. Seed and soil, right? Man and woman. It's just, that's how it looks. There's a partnership of sort of a dying to something so that you can live. And so that's it. That's just the DNA of existence. It's just how things work. And the church has to embody those things. And for me, that was it. Can I? I'm going to tell you a personal story. It's pretty personal, but do you mind? It's good though.
I don't mind. I mean,
okay. But I tell the story.
You're the one telling the personal story.
I'm the one. What am I talking about?
You've got the skin in the game. I'm here for it.
What am I talking about? I've told this on my pod, but I just want to share it with you, just like, because you're my friend. This is happening. So when I first became Orthodox, it was 30 years ago, and then right after that, I met my wife, but we didn't date. Long story short, I pined for her, and I even left and went overseas, and I came back and I've actually got married to her. She's a New Yorker, uptown, from born and raised in Harlem in the Bronx. And so it's a love story. I love this woman to death to this day. But within the first year and a half, we got pregnant. She got pregnant with our first. I have 4 daughters. But this was our first together. She had 2 daughters. So long story short, here comes the baby. And at that point, I was my spiritual father was in Rokor, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. They tend to be traditional, and so I still am. I still go to Rokor Parish. I'm indebted to that flavor of American Orthodoxy. So she's pregnant, and as you know, and everybody knows, when you're pregnant, things slow down in terms of your romantic life, and so they're slowing down. Let's just say to not even a crawl. Let's just say they're turned off.
The season of fasting.
It's fasting. It's baby imposed fasting, and so the thing is my daughter at the time is going to be due. And I see it coming because I'm a young guy and I'm enamored with my wife, like really enamored. And she's about to give birth. Wait a minute, in January, that's fine. But I'm doing all the math and I'm realizing then there's going to be a 6-week time after that. As people know, you're not exactly rekindling during that 6-week time. And there's a little baby. That's all dead news. And then I'm looking at the calendar and then the 52 days of fasting begins with before Pascha, before Easter.
Lent is coming.
Woo-hoo! Lent, yes, Lent. And I'm looking at it going, oh, no.
It's going to be a great Easter that year, baby. Great
Well, you already anticipated it. I went to my spiritual father and I said, Father, look, here's the situation. I just explained this. And he looks at me straight and he's like, so what are you asking me? And I said, well, economia is a word, it's like, well, life is hard, and also you're being crushed under the weight of the sins of the world. And so I understand that this happens to you. So maybe go have romance sex with your wife. But he just looked at me and went, well, I don't get what you're asking. And I said, well, I want to have relations with my wife during the fast. And he's like, so have relations with your wife. I don't get it. What's the problem? And I said, well, because of the fast, I don't want to break the fast. He goes, well, then don't break the fast. And so I'm going, okay, but I want to have relations. He says, are you asking me for a blessing?
He's looking for a dispensation.
Yeah. He says, I don't listen. I don't know who taught you Orthodoxy. I'm like 2 years into it. He said, you have to live with that. You're the one who's sitting in the bed, not me. So here's the deal. You don't get a blessing. And I told my wife, that's what he said. You think we had any relations? No. And so what happened for the next 8 weeks or whatever is I prepared for Pascha. And then just what you said, Paul, that was a true embodied understanding of the resurrection in the truest sense. And it stuck with me all these years that I had to live within the tension. And I decided, well, my wife decided, and in part, both of us decided that we'd try out what the church is teaching. And then I realized, bam, it has deep, profound meaning beyond just the words. That's my way of saying that there has to be that structure that is time tested, and that when you don't like it, you don't get to start your own church. It just doesn't work like that. You can, but you're going to miss out on the fruits of the fast, of the darkness. And so I don't know. That taught me a ton. That taught me more than all these good sermons he was preaching. Believe me, that taught me a lot.
I believe it.
There's some tension, there's some ability to live within the paradox. And I think Christians have lost a lot of that ability to say, yeah, guess what? I sinned, and also I'm forgiven, and also it sucks, and also I'll probably do it again, and also God is good, and I just keep going, and none of it makes that much sense. That's what I found that Orthodoxy allows me to do somehow. So,
well, I think, and I love your story. And I think part of when I listen to that story, what I hear from that story, part of the transition that happened into the modern world was the pre-modern world. In the pre-modern world, institutions, the church had made a certain peace with the givenness of the fasting and feasting that come in this dispensation. That this is whether we're living in the years of the fat cows or the lean cows, blessed be the name of the Lord. And whether the Lord brings me into a life or a season of fasting, or if he in his great generosity gives me a season of feasting, blessed be the name of the Lord. And what you are is in many ways comfortable with the givenness of your lot and the givenness of your life. And I think part of what has changed is we are in a culture of, to use Paul Kingsnorth, of the machine, that says to anybody who is waiting for blessing is a fool, and anyone who fasts in anticipation of celebration is a fool. If you want good things in the world, you have to take it and make it yourself, which is, of course, in many ways the spirit that motivates our father and mother to take the fruit of the tree and not hold from it. And so and that to sort of cycle back to the moment we had a few moments ago when we were thinking about, boy, I can do my little podcast, and I can raise money for this great effort and help these poor people over here, and I can bring aid and comfort to this widow over there, and I can do all of this stuff. But the machine is just crushing me down. And even if we start 500 estuaries, and even if 2,500 people participate in them faithfully, 10 years, 20 years from now, nobody's going to remember any of this.
I know, right? You can get into that. It's terrible, but you can get into
but again, I think part of what we're talking about in terms of what the church bestows in terms of the fasting and the feasting is, okay, bless the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I will finally trust him. And that level of faith and confidence in his goodness and in his sovereignty means that I can spend myself for small things, because finally the God of the universe sees and knows, and I know that my Redeemer lives, and with my eyes I will see him.
So good. It's so good. It's just so hard to stay in it. It's so hard to remember that as you try to build your name, your business, your family, whatever. Yeah, no.
I think I'm next if I look at
you're next. Sorry, Julian. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Julian. I'm a student currently going to University of Winnipeg. I'm a Hutterite, which is a kind of often unknown branch of Anabaptism, where We live in communities, live in community of goods, practice pacifism, and so that should probably locate me in a certain way with regards to this conversation. But I think you might be surprised at where I end up. Politically, I guess I would say that the first sort of way I think politically is regards to the church. So I think of the church, and specifically, my own community as a kind of alternative politics that's trying to live out the teachings of Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. So that's the primary form of politics I'm interested in. I think I sort of would identify myself with people like, Wendell Berry is a big influence, Ivan Illich, and also a conservative Canadian thinker called George Grant is also important to me. So I would kind of call myself a small c conservative, sort of a localist, and I hate this word. I won't even say it, but I sort of lean in Nate's direction as well, but probably not as radically as he does.
Well, that's because you're an embodied real Christian anarchist, and I'm just an ideological Christian anarchist.
I have a lot of thoughts, so hopefully I won't talk too long here. I said in the introduction that me being an Anabaptist should kind of locate me in a certain way vis-a-vis this lecture. And a Hutterite friend of mine sent me this video and said, "Wow, Paul Kingsnorth sounds like an Anabaptist here," and I agree with that. I think that's a good characterization of the position he's staking out. But my initial gut reaction when I hear Kingsnorth in this lecture and when I hear him elsewhere is I find him annoying. I don't like Kingsnorth, and I don't know. I've been struggling to describe why. I think one way for this becomes a live issue for me is that I feel like I've taken the position that Kingsnorth is taking in this lecture in the past, and I've moved on to a different place. So I think he's definitely getting at something real in what he's staking out. These hard sayings of the Gospels of hate your parents, practice nonviolence, don't have possessions, and so on. Yeah, this kind of radical critique of creation, a kind of apocalyptic perspective is how I would describe it. That's there. I think that's right. I also associate it with Kierkegaard, particularly in his book Attack Upon Christendom, where he sort of, I've prepared some quotes here, where he sort of says, what Christendom basically does is it just sort of creates this separation between you and Christ. It's just these layers of separation, and we need to kind of get beyond this history and kind of come to contemporaneousness with Christ. And so this vision of that thing that animates him, I think, is this vision of nakedness, this vision of the nakedness of the garden, this naked Christ, this kind of fool, the sort of Russian fool is kind of in the background here. And I think you kind of need to see that to be a real Christian. You kind of have to get that about Christianity to understand something. I think another piece that comes in here is this critique of technology, which is definitely, in my understanding, influenced by Ellul, who talks about technique as this kind of overpowering system within which we kind of have no escape. And that's in the background for Kingsnorth's view of the machine. But I think my problem fundamentally with Kingsnorth is that he wants to return to the Garden of Eden. He wants to return to this nakedness. He's got this, I would describe it as a fantasy of purity. He's got this fantasy of of stripping it all away. And I think where it leaves him is kind of radically discontented and radically unable to do anything about it. And so it's a kind of endless self-flagellation and with an impossibility to do anything. So a little paradigm I came up with to think about this is, I think Kingsnorth is operating from a posture of asceticism or fasting. He wants to, he sees the problem, he sees the problem, and he wants to kind of fast from technology, from possessions, from creation, and it's a kind of radical posture of fasting, of stripping away the layers. And that's because he sees the problem of gluttony. He sees that, there's this thing of, do you see what I'm getting at with, I'm afraid I'm kind of losing people here. But I see this as a polarity between gluttony on the one hand and fasting on the other. So gluttony is this kind of posture of, pure technological efficiency. I've kind of lost myself here.
No.
And on the other hand, he's advocating for.
I think you're trying to establish a healthy relationship toward desire. I'm tracking
me
you
too.
entirely.
Me too.
What you're trying to say, I think, Julian, is that what you see Kingsnorth doing is like just essentially making a move that's more of a Buddhist move than a Christian one, right? Where he's wanting to just reject desire altogether, because he sees how giving in to desire can lead to what you're describing as gluttony.
On the one hand, I'm saying these radical sayings of Christ are a form of asceticism that are responding to the gluttony of the human condition. And I think the proper posture is a posture of feasting, which says the goods of creation are not to be hoarded by an individual, but are to be shared amongst, you're to invite others into the abundance. And I think that's a vision that says, the goods of creation are to be enjoyed. They're good. You're not supposed to literally hate your family and kind of go in this individualistic path of mortification. You're supposed to be chastising these goods of creation so that they can be truly what they are supposed to be. And I think that if you think about it that way, that changes how you think about community, that changes how you think about technology, that changes how you think about possessions. It was a big paradigm shift for me. And so I just see Kingsnorth as sort of, he's stuck on one side of the polarity, and he's eventually going to have to, see that you can't reject creation altogether, which is a strange position to be in for an environmentalist. I just think it was really one-sided, and I think I was left with, well, Kingsnorth, what do you want your audience to do? Like you've radically critiqued everything here, but nobody can exist in the posture you're describing. Nobody can exist in this kind of posture of total rejection, of total suffering, of total giving up. And I don't think that's what Christ intended for us.
Which is, Julian, I'm going to break the rule here because I just have to point out, Julian, this is why you rejected the label Christian anarchist, even though it's maybe an accurate descriptor of your politics, because of the fact that you want to point toward your existence in an actual embodied community as a Hutterite that has tried to find some kind of balance, the kind of balance that you're talking about. So
that's exactly right. And yeah. I think where I end up here, I'm curious what Cale will make of my fasting, feasting, gluttony, because I think that's basically the Catholic position as I understand it. But yeah.
I feel like the entire conversation is a little bit off. Again, the dial's not quite tuned in that I wonder if theological and philosophical talks about civilization aren't kind of veiling what we're really talking about. I don't know if you have people like this in your life, but there are a few people I know. I feel like no matter what we're discussing, they're never quite saying what they really mean. Like we're kind of always talking a little bit past each other, and I can't quite tell why. Like when you say this, what do you really mean? What are you really saying? And I think, and here I'm talking not just about Kingsnorth, but about First Things and kind of that entire ethos. Like it feels to me like, wait, what are you really saying though? Like when you're talking about Christian civilization, what do you really mean? And it's an uneasy feeling for me, one that I can't fully name, because I'm not sure the people in the conversation even know exactly what they're saying. It feels a bit cloak and dagger to me, and the untruthfulness of it is uneasing for me. And that, again, that's not to call out Kingsnorth. I mean, he's just sharing what he's sharing, but that giving it in that setting with, again, for me, 20 plus years of the conversation swirling in schools and churches where I serve, that First Things is representative of. It's certainly not all down to First Things, but like that they represent like that. I feel like that's that kind of not quite being truthful about what you're really saying has shows up in a lot of these places, in a lot of these conversations. I hope that makes sense.
Kale.
Yeah, so I really enjoy reading Kingsnorth's work. You know, I probably stumbled upon him by way of Rod Dreher initially, and I met his work at such a point in my life where I was profoundly dispirited by the state of the sort of the governing structures of my own church, and so that's an important sort of point for me personally. So I enjoy his writing. I enjoy his invocation of Elul and sort of leaning into the conversation about the machine or technique, looking squarely in the face, or an attempt to look squarely at the face at techno-optimism and its allure. And so I've been attracted to his work on those grounds. I was also kind of thrilled, I think, to see that he was going to go right into the heart of a First Things soiree with quite a pedigree of speakers at the Erasmus lecture sequence, of including then Cardinal Ratzinger. So that was it's a pretty impressive symbolic moment. And as someone who's read First Things off and on for a really long time, I mean, I would say since I was maybe 17 or 18 years old, and have seen it go through its various permutations, especially in the wake of the death of Newhouse and the kind of ignominy that Newhouse, I think, rightly went through with his support of what turned out to be a truly demonic and vile character in Marcel Maciel, the head of the Legionnaires of Christ. And so, and of course, that coupled with, I think, the real, I guess this is putting it lightly, but the egg and face in the aftermath of the Iraq War debacle and his support for all of that. Anyway, I think that's an important part of this context. Now, if you've watched the magazine in the last few years, I would say in the last, under Rusty Reno's editorship, his direction, I think that it is going into those waters that Father Joe already talked about of, imagining a kind of a post-liberal reality and what that might be. And so I find this to be actually a pretty exciting moment in these sorts of circles, of sort of maybe breaking out of certain patterns, ruts, maybe something like that. So that's sort of my general take on it. And it's, it's right in the heart of New York City. I think that's also a very important symbolic point of reference. There he is. And he even makes the joke that he had to go to a thrift store to buy a tie in order to sort of blend in order to give the lecture. I thought that was both funny and I think a tell of some sort. But I'm listening to him, and I think maybe Vanderklay had a similar reaction to it. There's that part of me that kind of soars with that prophetic trajectory, sort of calling me back to sort of the radical quality of Jesus, and that kind of that John the Baptist strain of the whole Christian thing, with all of that, and that I think was, it works for me on some level, and so I'm immediately doing this thing inside. I'm listening, and I'm like, well, yeah, like, maybe I probably should get rid of that, and I probably have gotten too cozy with this, and maybe I should be a little bit more ascetic, and and to your point about fasting and all that, maybe I've been a little bit too fat, so that part is working within me. But then also just intellectually, I love a good taxonomy, and so he provides us with a kind of 5-part taxonomy of what should your reaction be to all of this sort of stuff, and then you sort of get through it, and toward the end, I'm frustrated because, like I said, these other parts of me kind of kick in, and I wonder if there is there a larger attraction to the notion of a solution, the notion of a solvent that we can kind of finally kind of tag this thing down. And I find that to be a very kind of modernist. I don't mean that in theological terms. I mean that sort of socio-cultural, political. It's such a modernist desire to solve, to eradicate, to arrive. And I wonder, with someone like Kingsnorth, as I struggle to make sense of him, does Christianity solve things, or does it create tensions by which we bring things together? And so as it happened, I've been teaching a variety of stories set in and around the court of Camelot, and Arthur and his round table, and the knights, and all of this. And if you read those stories, shockingly little takes place on the field of battle. It sort of takes as it's well, obviously, they have armor, they have swords and lances and horses and all of this, and of course they have to sort of protect the realm. But so much of the drama takes place inside, at court, in a variety of different ways. And what is the knight doing? Well, the knight is protecting the garden as the sort of the city, protects the keep as the city, and the sort of the protected lands, the reach of the law, and those borders, the outlaw and the in-law, and all of that. And then I again, I'm being a little bit associative here. And then I think of Jesus in Pilate's palace, and there he is, right, in this sort of this like wildly performative moment where you're like, finally, Jesus will kind of be able to answer the questions, and he chooses not to, and that's sort of a whole interesting point unto itself. And so you've got this, this radical intersection of the spirit, this sort of radical gospel spirit, and nothing is more machine-like than Rome in Palestine in Jesus's time. And so there just seem to be these kind of necessary tensions that I wonder if part of Kingsnorth's lament is that he really wants to sort of arrive somewhere, and I don't think that these are solvable problems. I think that the Christian is called to live in a kind of weird tension between feasting and fasting. And there's a reason why we have a calendar, and we kind of live in the world through the seasons, and there's always a period of fasting prior to feasting, and all of that. I think that's important. And so then my kind of point here, is two things, actually. The image of the New Jerusalem coming down from the heavens. I wonder if, interestingly enough, that's Kingsnorth being too literal about an image, and I wonder if that is an image of eminence and emergence converging on what flowers as a New Jerusalem. And I think there's a garden is a kind of pre-city it's kind of in its nascent forms as it sort of builds itself up and out, you know. And then I think of this last question, you know, is civilization mammon? And, you know, I don't think so. So again, I don't have a solution to that. But I do think that is in part what Kingsnorth is sort of shoving in our faces, is that you all are worshiping mammon. And look, anytime someone tells me that I'm worshiping mammon, I have to be honest with myself and say, well, you know, maybe I do like my hot shower a little bit too much. You know, maybe I do like my gadgetry a little bit too much. Maybe I do like, you know, playing fantasy football too much. You know what I mean? You get kind of into these kind of modes where, you know, maybe so. And so therefore, then I go back to this idea of living in some kind of tension. So there.
Thank you.
Something in his everyday apocalypse that something in me yearned to participate in, but couldn't because I'm the father of a family. And so in that sense, I need to, you know, maintain the doors and keep the family fed and keep the children warm. But there was another part of me, and I think it was tied to the meaning crisis, which, like, sort of in The Walking Dead, I remember at one point in the series, they all begin to realize that all of the survivors are infected with the zombie virus. And the truth is that it doesn't take a zombie bite to turn. All they need to do is die and they will turn. And so suddenly the whole crew now has to, right before people get to or at the moment of death, they have to, you know, they have to do the kill shot to keep their loved ones from becoming a monster. And so I'm curious about what's happening in terms of you emotionally now that the superficial has reemerged and the water is back on and the lights are back on and the internet is back on. And now when you go to church, I imagine there's a layer that things are different because you've now shared something with these people, and that will never be taken away from you. You will always have a degree of intimacy and memory of moments of intimacy that will go with you for as long as each of you shall live. But I'm curious about if you're having any experience of this, of nostalgia or longing or lament for the day of the Lord and the crisis.
Well, yes, certainly. And I even recognized that as the life got easier, there was always a bittersweetness. It's actually not that different from being a parent, actually.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
You know, when the internet came back on, it was useful to be able to communicate with my mom and my daughters and let them know that I was alive.
Yeah.
And there was a feeling of, shit, now I'm going to be doing this thing again.
Yes.
So that's real. What I think is maybe the most particular, I was noticing, like, in my mind, like this turning sideways. So Walking Dead is nice because it, you know, the kill shot, it's kind of like it converts our insidious back into the acute. It's like it's like this, but it's this way, not this way. So what does it look like? Well, one of the things it looks like is there was a field of intimacy that came out during the crisis. And then by this, I mean literally the human beings who I began to cultivate relationships with because we were helping each other, which is now no longer present. You know, it's like a constriction of a vascular system. So the smallest capillaries are no longer active. And so those nutrients are no longer reaching that part of the body. I mean, there are people that I was working side by side every day that I haven't seen in 2 weeks. There are people that I was serving, people I was bringing food, water, shelter to that I haven't seen. And so on the one hand, as life has become easy again, and pleasant, you know, I can go to a restaurant, I can get food. It's nice. You know, 2 days ago, we could actually, or I guess today, I could actually drink with a glass at the restaurant, which was, that's nice. Ice, all these are nice. And also a feeling of, how do you say, like the most marginal, like the relationships that are not as close to the center. They're no longer, in my case, captured by my family, my direct physical neighbors, house church, and church, right? Those are the heartbeats that everybody within that sphere is still, it's tight, like it's rich. But there's now people who were within that sphere that are no longer within that sphere. And that will continue. Now, interestingly enough, we have Thanksgiving coming up.
Yes.
And we're going to be hosting thousands of meals in the park. It actually was a beautiful kind of secular sacred combo.
Yeah.
There's a Catholic church on this side, there's our church on this side, and then there's a park and a library in the middle, more or less. Like, there's not quite exactly adjacent, but within like a 2-minute walk of the place where our church happens to be. And so there was people operating in the secular domain doing good work during the crisis at the park. And then the two churches were doing their thing. And of course, there was lots of cross-fertilization.
Yep.
And so I discovered at house church last night that we're bringing the band back together.
Yeah.
There's something like literally 500 turkeys that are being brought in, and just getting a massive Thanksgiving feast in this park for everybody, right? Because there's still a lot of everybody who's not in the position to be able to have a thing. And so this is like a way of bringing these relationships back. I'm going to be reaching out to a bunch of people. In some cases, I may have to actually drive out and walk up because they're probably still off the grid. My world got easier, not everybody's did. And say, hey, do you have plans for Thanksgiving? Right? Do you have a place to be where you can be in communion with other people? Sorry, it's fine. I just remembered that my neighbor was decorating for Christmas. I was like, what do you do decorating for Christmas before Thanksgiving? She said, well, the thing I'm most thankful for is Jesus. So it made all the sense in the world to me. I go, yeah, okay. Good answer. Put on this Frank Sinatra. Give me some eggnog. But that notion of the real sadness, and by the way, this is a real sadness that I have in general, because I'm really terrible at maintaining relationships. So the real sadness of the relationships of care that were outside of that particular sphere that are fading, and likely, in fact, just will fade.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah. I've been the Paul Kingsnorth. Did you see the Paul Kingsnorth talk at First Things? Have you had a chance to look at that? Okay.
I saw his talk, and then I actually watched you talk about his talk.
Oh, okay. Well, wonderful. Well, it's Grail Country just did a group conversation on it. I talked to Vesper Stamper yesterday. I talked to John Heers, and part of what's emerging from that for me is this sense of the rhythm of fasting and feasting that has been in the church for a very long time. And the Orthodox and the Catholics continue to embody it to a degree. And for me, this gets at the nature, the relationship between the day of the Lord, which is, the dramatic, the acute, the thing that cannot be denied. I mean, you could not, there's no sense of riding it out. Unless you're a serious prepper who's living in a bunker and is ready to, tell everyone who's knocking on the steel door, go away, I'm in the middle of Seinfeld. The day of the Lord, in many ways, the rhythm of fasting and feasting season. So even though Americans sort of have it wrong, Advent is a fasting season. Christmas is a season, not just a day, and that's a feasting season. And then you've got Epiphany, and pretty soon you're going to have Lent, which is a fasting season, and then you're going to have Easter, which is a feasting season. And I've been thinking about the fact that because we can't adequately manage, because we are so small. I can think of John Vervaeke's combinatorial explosiveness. The world is just too massive, because we can't both take in the mundane and the apocalyptic, because we have to sort of live in it sequentially. Because what would happen if even if the highways were never reconstructed and the water never came on again, and the power never went on. And of course, in terms of The Walking Dead, that is an experiment in that. So you would all sort of create little systems so that once again the mundane and even this insidious could be afforded to
Yep.
you, because you
Totally.
cannot live in the apocalypse for very long without sort of becoming a zombie. And that's very much what people become. And when I often look at the homeless shambling around my neighborhood, I often think of zombies because they walk like them and they push carts and they go slow, and many of them sort of with the strange combination of hoarding and living and having to contain all your belongings to one or two shopping carts. You see this sort of continual grooming of the things in your shopping carts, in and out and in and out. And so this the church, and when we talked about sacraments, the church has managed to, at a very deep level and without often being able to articulate what we're doing, has managed to embody this fasting and feasting rhythm to try to keep the apocalyptic always close enough to us, I think in some ways, to sort of keep the code alive within us, so that when the day of the Lord comes, it's sort of like, the prepper's closet, where the churches keep the sacraments and the fasting and feasting to keep the prepper's closet close, so that, oh yeah,
Nice.
we're going to be, the day of the Lord has come, and now we are going to be sacrificing family time. We are going to be sacrificing marital time. We're going to be sacrificing our wealth. We're going to be sacrificing almost anything. We're going to put ourselves at risk we wouldn't normally put ourselves at, because the day of the Lord has come and I must respond. And, when I think about your story and how it is and why it is you landed where you are, I see the providence of God. Because I would think of all of the places in North America where, a church scene would touch Jordan's wife's heart, and of course the feminine saying, directing you, Jordan, pay attention to this. Oh, I've been walking by churches all my life, and now suddenly I see something I never saw before. God has brought me through years and so many things to this point where now I see it. And so now I'm settling. And of course, no one on the mountain said, oh, by the way, we have hurricanes every 400 or 500 years that devastate us, because nobody has that memory. And so I very much see the hand of God in, and this of course is so, I barely dare to say it, because I understand how impossible these words are. The hand of God in the storm, which of course before Lisbon, let's say the devastation of Lisbon that happens in the early modern period, people would regularly say, and it's in the Bible, a plague comes upon Israel, and well, of course, David and his census, that's what did it. I'm not about to say that you brought the hurricane, but the hand of God it's something we can not talk about, but it's also something we can't talk about.
Well, I can say this. There's a lot. This is, in some sense, if you want to say that I brought the hurricane, which you don't, but just it would clearly be the opposite. Right? Whatever God's doing happened to bring me here, and a lot of other stuff going on, and a hurricane. Right?
Yes,
which I'm a leaf. Right? I'm a leaf blowing in the wind, and there's a whole hurricane. Actually, the hurricanes are a good metaphor. There's a lot going on here, by the way. There's just a ton. Just off the charts how much is going on. But here's something in terms of seeing the hand of God. During the context of particularly again after day 3, we collectively begin to notice that the hand of God was more visible. You could actually see the hand of God. And in some cases, like in almost visually, you would notice and begin to rest on this fact that I couldn't call person X because I don't have a phone. I really need person X right now because person Y has just shown up. Oh, it turns out the person X just came into the room. Okay, great. Once. How about 700 times in a row? Right? How about the person X didn't just come from over here? Person X came from Martha's Vineyard and doesn't know why they're there. And they're in exactly the right moment. Right? This is like the degree to which this starts to become the. I was at this event with John Heers actually in Florida with Pajot as well about a week ago. And the part of the revelation, moving it from the cognitive to faith, right? Moving the cognitive to the experience and integrated now at a level which is now simply reality for me, is that reality is intrinsically miraculous.
Yes.
The reason why we don't know that is that we don't live in reality. We have exited ourselves out of reality into a fabrication of our own imagination. And whenever the day of the Lord comes, we are restored back to reality to some degree, ideally deeply, at which point it becomes self-evident that reality is intrinsically miraculous because you see it all around you, and it becomes more and more, how would you say, high res. You could just you could see it, and you're like, huh, okay. And I wouldn't be at all surprised, by the way. What are these guys called? The cessationists? I wouldn't be at all surprised is that if enough of us restored ourselves to reality for long enough, what would be considered old school, coarse grained miracles would start popping up.
Yeah.
Would not. In fact, I would be surprised if it didn't happen, to be honest.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. The ghost with the Messiah complex. A Messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. The hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad, daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend, always on the brink of somewhere, each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river, dreamt in the sunshine, Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us, baptized in ball pits, a clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please, say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers. See what I say. Just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. I think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host, who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. We're in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved, a total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect, or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show, Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes, or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes, and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.